So in this video, I want to talk about one example of SAT math problem. And the question is, in the xy plane, 2, 16 lies in the graph of the function f of x is equal to negative 2x squared plus bx plus 8. And what is the value of b right over here? So there are some choices for our answers right over here. And before we solve for this question, let's think about our solutions for that question. And in the first step, we always think about in terms of the relation between coordinate and the function because they gave us that information. And then we also need to think about in terms of a properties of a graphs of the function. Now let's think about in terms of the function of the question. So for the function, as we have learned in the last two videos, we know that our in this case function is f. And for the function, it sometimes contains factors of it, but right now it contains it, which is x. And with that function, it always should contain a specific equation for it, which is negative 2x squared plus bx plus 8. And we're trying to find the value of b. So at first, let's think about in terms of a function. If we specific input, if we input the value to the our factor of a function, which means we also need to input the value to the values that contains the same variables, and there will be a function, and then there will be a output. And this is how the function works. So let's think about the question. So they had gave us a coordinate and the function, so we can write that down that 2, 16, and our function is f of x is equal to negative 2x squared plus bx plus 8. And we can think about it this way. If we know that 2 is the value of the x and the 16 is the value of a y. If we input the 2 to the value, which is x, the factor, and we also need to put the value to our equation, and if we input it, that will going to give us output as 16. So if I do it as I have said, it will going to be at first. So if we input 2 to the x values, also right over here, it will going to be f of 2. It will going to be negative 2 times 2 squared plus 2b, because we inputted 2 as an x, and also x right over here. And then we got plus 8, and we got the output that is 16. So we can simplify our equation right over here. We know that negative 2, at first 2 squared is 2 times 2, which is 4, times negative 2 is negative 8, plus 2b plus 8, and that should be equal to 16. And then all we have to do is that we can simplify negative 8 and then 8 into 0, and then we get 2b is equal to 16. So we get 2b is equal to 16, which means we can divide 2 to the both sides to isolate the b term. We get b is equal to 8. So we can see that our answer for this question will going to be C in this case. So we can write our full equation down, and our full equation is f of x, the function, is equal to negative 2x squared plus, we know the value of b, which is 8 in this case, plus 8b, so 8x plus 8. And this is our function with the full variables. So let's think about in terms of a graph of this function. And for the graph of the function, it's not important when it comes to solving for the answer. But the reason why I'm doing this is because when you go to more advanced SAT math function problem, it's hard to solve it if you don't really know about the graphs. So before we graph this function, let's think about in terms of the function itself. F of x is equal to negative 2x squared plus 8x plus 8. So f of x is equal to negative 2x squared plus 8x plus 8. And the way to find the graph is by make this into a binomial and find the values of x. But it's hard to find it because it is not a perfect square or the binomials that can factor easily. So all you have to do is that we can simplify this binomial into a perfect square. So at first, the way to factor this out into a perfect square is that at first, let's just factor it out with a greatest common factor, which is negative 2. And then it will going to be, if you pull out negative 2 from the negative 2x squared, it will going to be x squared. Positive 8x divided by negative 2 is minus 4x. And positive 8 divided by negative 2 is negative 4. The reason why I wrote negative 4 here is because we are going to make a perfect square and there will be some numbers here. And the way to think about converting to a perfect square is by thinking about just the x terms. So for the x terms, in order to find the value right over here, all you have to do is divide. So divide 2 and square it. And this is the kind of a formula to find a next version right over here, next number. And if we apply this, so if you apply this, it will going to be negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2, and the square, it will going to be positive 4. We can write positive 4. But if you just wrote positive 4, it will affect this graph. It will affect this function and change its value. So we can subtract 4 also, which will going to be 0 in this case. So all we did is we just arranged the function, the binomial, into a perfect square. But this is not quite yet for the perfect square yet. So all you have to do right now is we can convert x squared minus 4x plus 4 into a perfect square and then leave negative 2, then times x squared minus 4x plus 4. If we convert it into a binomial, it will going to be, well, we have learned that according to a binomial theorem, x times x makes x squared, then minus 2, and the minus 2 makes, if we add it, it will going to give us negative 4x. And if we multiply, it should give us positive 4, which is in this case right over here. So we can write it down. Instead of x squared plus 4x plus 4, we can bring this down here, that x minus 2 times x minus 2. And then we still have negative 4 and negative 4, which can be simplified as negative 8. Now we can distribute 2, negative 2. If you do that, we will going to get some value. But before we do that, let's think about it in this way. If we distribute it to all sides, it will make a complicated calculation. So all we have to do is that x minus 2 times x minus 2 is x minus 2 squared. And that's the whole point why we made it into a perfect square. So negative 2 times x minus 2 squared and minus 8. And now all you have to do is distribute negative 2. So let's think about it in this way. So we can find the maximum point since we knew that it is negative coefficient of the x squared term, which means it is going downward. And the maximum point in this case will going to be 16, which means the y value will going to be 16. And I'm going to tell you why. It is because, let's say, this term will obviously gonna be always positive, because even though it's negative, if you square it, it's going to be positive. Or it is 0 if the x value is 2. But if you multiply into negative, it will going to be negative always, or 0. But if it's negative, it won't give us 16, it will give us 15, 14, or it will just subtract from 16. And the highest value right over here, and this is simply y f of x. And it is a case where this term is equal to 0. And it is a case where x value, x coordinate is 2. So if it's 0, our y value output will going to be 16. So that's why the maximum point is 2, 16. So let's graph it. So let's say this is 1 and 2. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Let's say it is right over here. And we could have just made this maximum point right over here where the coordinate is 2, 16, and it is going downward. And if you were to graph it, if you want to graph it, we can use our function f of x, original function, is equal to negative 2x squared plus bx. We know the value of b, which is 8x plus 8. And now we can find some easy values when the x is equal to 0. The y value is just 8. So when x is 0, the y value is going to be 8. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right over here. So, and then let's graph one more point so that we can get our parabola. And one more point is that, let's say it is a x cases where the x is equal to 1. It is a case that is easy to find. X squares 1, 1 squares 1, and then minus 2 is negative 2, and then plus 8 times 1 is plus 8, and then positive 8, which will going to give us 14. So when x is 1, the y value is 14, which is output. So when it is 1, it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, right over here. So if you graph it, it will be something like this. And it will keep, so if you graph it actually, it will be something that look like this. And it will keep going down. So we talked about the graph of the function, and we talked about how to make and find the value of the maximum point. And the formula like this one, if we erase a little bit for the more clear one. So like this term right over here, we call it into a vertex form, the vertex form. The reason why we call it into a vertex form is that we can find the maximum or minimum points using these terms, and that will going to be a vertex. So that's why we call this a vertex form.